All right. Yesterday, June 19th, Spokane County deputies were engaged in an incident in which 2 of them were shot and wounded. The deputies involved are Matt Spink. He started working with the Sheriff's Office in 1999, has been assigned to the North Districts in patrol since that time. Michael Northway started his career with the Spokane County Sheriff's Office in the jail, transferred over to the Patrol Division in 1999, and has been working in a few different districts, but mainly north for the last 6 years. He and Matt worked on the same platoon. They worked very closely together. They were friends, and I'm glad to report that they're doing well. Matt suffered 1 gunshot wound to his leg, and Deputy Northway suffered 4 wounds, both arms and both legs areas. Deputy Northway was in surgery for quite a while last night, and he's expected to have to undergo further surgery to repair his wounds. The individual involved in the situation was an individual by the name of Charlie Wallace. Members of the Regional Drug Task Force had information that Wallace had walked away from a drug rehab facility that the court had ordered him to. He was released from the Spokane County Jail without bond in order to attend that drug treatment program. He walked away. Since that time, he has been a fugitive. The drug team started looking for Mr. Wallace. Yesterday, they coordinated with Deputy Spink and Deputy Northway to make a traffic stop, at which time they were engaged in the gunfight. Mr. Wallace put this entire community at extreme risk. He drove through the streets of Spokane at very high rates of speed. He tried to, it appears through video, that when he crossed over into the southbound lane going northbound of Highway 2, he put a lot of citizens at risk, nearly causing multiple head-on collisions. When he approached the town of Deer Park, deputies were able to engage him. There was gunfire exchange between Mr. Wallace and a Spokane County detective, at which time we deployed spike strips, and Mr. Wallace vehicle hit the back end of a patrol car and went into a Jersey barrier. When confronted with law enforcement, Mr. Wallace inflicted 1 gunshot wound to his head, self-inflicted, and died at the scene. This individual has an extensive criminal history. This right here is his criminal history. It's fairly thick, and I question why this individual was allowed to be on the streets of Spokane instead of being in jail where he should have been. I again want to say something to the citizens who risked their own lives to come to the aid of Deputy Spink and Deputy Northway. Both Deputy Spink and Northway want me to express their heartfelt thanks for coming to their aid and, quite frankly, possibly saving their lives. Deputy Northway was wounded in such a severe manner that about approximately 3 inches of the artery in his arm was blown away, and the individual that came to his aid was able to stop that bleeding and possibly saved his life. So the citizens of Spokane, we owe you a great deal of thanks for those who stopped and helped those deputies through that time. They are greatly appreciative. Any questions?
Sheriff, regarding the decision to release Wallace, have you been in contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office or the Magistrate's Office regarding that decision?
I received a call from a federal law enforcement partner last night. He wanted me to know in no uncertain terms that the U.S. Attorney's Office fought very vigorously to prevent Wallace from being released.
I know court documents show that part of the decision to release Wallace was because he was going to that inpatient drug treatment facility program. Do you know how heavily that sort of decision, as far as a person going to a drug treatment facility program, weighs in on a decision to be released from jail?
With the charges that Mr. Wallace was facing, he was looking at possibly life in federal penitentiary. I don't know if it's a good idea to release anybody to a drug rehab when he's facing that kind of charges. Drug rehab works best when people go through the trial systems, they are incarcerated, they go through extensive drug rehab, and once they're released, they have a good likelihood of trying to turn their life around. You don't do it in reverse.
And Sheriff, what charge was he facing when he was released?
He was facing drug charges, I believe, for the sale of heroin within this community.
Do you know how many people were traveling with him when he first was approached by the deputies?
Right now, Jonathan, we're still trying to verify that, and until we have a complete picture, I won't address that. We'll try to get that information to you as soon as we can.
Have police or deputies detained anyone who they believe were with him at the time?
We have suspects detained and in custody at this time that may be related to the situation. Again, that's under investigation, and we'll get that information to you as soon as we get all the details.
Sheriff, how common is it for somebody facing a federal indictment to be allowed out of jail? Do you see that very
It's the first time I've heard of it.
There are reports that Northway also suffered a shattered femur. Is that true?
Yes, and once doctors were able to repair the artery, they worked on the femur late into the night. Deputy Northway was in surgery for a very extensive part of the night. When I left around 12:30, he was still in surgery.
Are there any other details you can give us about the locations at Princeton and Alcan?
Not at this time. Until we get all that information locked down, we don't want to provide you any information that we haven't verified.
Has anyone been in contact with Mr. Wallace's family?
I'm not sure, Megan.
Sheriff, it looks like that Wallace was actually a passenger in that vehicle.
He was a passenger, Jeff.
And so when the SUV drove off after the exchange of gunfire between the deputies and Wallace, do you have any idea who was driving the ride at that point?
We have information in reference to that, but at this time, Jeff, until we make sure we've verified everything, we're not going to release that.
Do you know if anyone else fired a gun at that initial scene where the deputies first arrived besides Wallace?
The deputies returned fire at Wallace.
Any of the other suspects, though, fired?
We don't have any information as far as any of the other subjects firing at the deputies.
Firearm Wallace used?
We do, but I'm not releasing that until we have that verified, forensically.
Can you identify the Spokane County detective who exchanged gunfire with him?
We will very shortly, as soon as we had, within about 48 hours, we tend to release that information, so you'll probably have that tomorrow.
Do you know how long he was a fugitive, Sheriff, or when he escaped or stopped attending the rehab home?
I believe, Jeff, that it was May 31st is when the judge released him. I'm not quite sure when he went into fugitive status.
Are you familiar with the protocol as far as when somebody who's been federally indicted and in custody of U.S. Marshals goes to an inpatient drug facility treatment program, if the U.S. Marshals escort him to that facility treatment program, or at that point when he's released, he's on his own and it's up to him to go to that program?
I'm not familiar with that protocol. It'd be a good question for U.S. Marshal there. He'd be able to give you all that information.
Do you feel like there was a disconnect in the system?
I believe that there's a disconnect when you have somebody with those type of charges released without bond to go to those type of treatment, especially with the seriousness of the crime that he was facing and the years of time that he was facing.
Do you feel this is a bigger problem in Spokane, these repeat offenders going to jail than being back out on the street?
I think it's a huge problem. Within a month and a half, between April and May, my deputies arrested an individual 3 times. Each time they arrested him, they arrested him for escalating charges. The final was a home invasion robbery.
What part of the system is the problem coming in at?
I think that based on the discussions I've had discussions with the prosecutor's office, I've had discussions with a a multitude of sections of the criminal justice system, and I'm still waiting to have a discussion with the courts, the judges. In April, I was supposed to have a meeting with them. That got canceled, and we haven't been able to reschedule that.
And do you feel there is a solution for this problem?
Yes, when somebody's facing those type of serious crimes and they're repeat offenders, you keep them in jail. That's the solution.
There
Sheriff,
have been some reports that Wallace was under surveillance during the time that he was arrested. Do you know if...
Pardon, bus.
Oh. There have been some reports that Wallace was under surveillance during the time that he was a fugitive. Do you know if that's true, and if so, who was surveilling him?
They were attempting to locate him. He wasn't under direct surveillance, I believe, until that day, but we'll get that information to you as soon as we verify that. Jonathan?
Sheriff, the residents who live nearby the home that was examined in Princeton say that that home was involved in a home invasion robbery a few weeks ago in which a man was shot in the leg. Can you tell us anything about that?
Jonathan, I don't have that information. The one thing I can tell you is that the weapon that Mr. Wallace used was stolen from a vehicle in Liberty Lake last fall. So this was a stolen weapon used against law enforcement, and that is a prime example of how property crimes aren't just property crimes. They're very serious matters, and that's why I really think that the judicial system needs to take a hard look at what they're putting back onto the streets.
Sheriff, how are the families of the deputies doing?
The families are doing well, as well as it can be expected. There's going to be a lot of shock right now. I think the entire law enforcement community is in shock right now. And they're doing their jobs as far as law enforcement community. We are working very diligently to make sure those families are taken care of in a multitude of different ways, making sure that the other deputies and law enforcement officers and dispatchers that were involved in that situation are taken care of. The dispatchers did a great job yesterday. I don't know, you all have scanners, so I know that you were listening to the radio traffic. This was a very great response by our law enforcement community. All sides of law enforcement worked very well together, the State Patrol, the City Police, the Sheriff's Office, and it was not chaotic whatsoever. It was very, very well orchestrated as far as the response, and I take my hat off to all my partners and thank them for that.
The role that Air One played in you catching up with him before he hurt anybody else, that was pretty significant.
Air One played a key role because it took the risk from the pursuing officers, law enforcement officers, and allowed them to think about where they were going. Air One was able to track that, track the suspect, and keep an eye on them. And you know, folks, most law enforcement agencies, when they have a helicopter program, they run it on about $80,000 or $800,000 a year. $800,000 a year. Spokane County, because of great work and leadership of soon-to-be Sergeant Dave Ellis, has that particular unit running for $95,000 a year with cooperation and teamwork from the Spokane Police Department and multitude of agencies from Idaho. So we run that program, and Jeff, that program is a great asset to the community. The community recognizes that, and that's why the community supports it as far as law enforcement.
You are aware of any statements that Wallace may have made prior to this that he was not ever going back to federal prison and that he would shoot it out with law enforcement as necessary?
I've heard those statements, Jeff, but I don't know if I could confirm those with you. As soon as we have all that information, we will be more than happy to provide that to you.
Do you know if the
Joshua
deputy...
Fowler, one of your suspects that's in custody?
I'm not quite sure. Again, all that part is under current investigation, and we don't want to jeopardize that part of the investigation whatsoever.
Do you know how many officers were involved from multiple agencies? Can you provide an estimate?
I would venture to say that all law enforcement that was on duty during that time were engaged in one way or another. We had our federal partners. They were on scene. They were helping out. We had phone calls from them. They were actually helping with sidebar investigations. We had all the local assets and State Patrol. This was a combined effort, and we, again, the training that is provided to our officers within this area showed yesterday.
Any word from the hospital when either of your deputies may be released?
Pardon?
Any word on when they may be released?
Not as yet. Not as yet. I know that Deputy Northway is facing several more surgeries to repair his arm.
And what is the condition of Deputy Spink?
Deputy Spink is doing very well. Again, one gunshot wound to his leg, and he's doing well. He was in very good spirits last night when I talked with him.
Do you know if Wallace was hit by any deputy fire or police fire?
No. According to the medical examiners, there was only one gunshot wound that was self-inflicted to the head.
Was he wearing a wig when he was stopped, you know?
I can verify that for you, Megan. As soon as we get the investigators' reports, we'd be able to do that.
The great lengths that Wallace went to escape and all the people they put in jeopardy in the process of trying to not return to federal prison, does that speak to just how violent and dangerous this person is? It seemed like your deputies literally took the bullets for us, because if we had crossed him up in a parking lot fighting over a parking spot, he wouldn't have hesitated to hurt us either.
That's a possibility, Jeff. That's a direct possibility. Whenever you have somebody out and had that type of criminal history, it did put the citizens of this county at great risk. It was just happened to be that law enforcement made contact with him, and he decided on his course of actions.
Were there multiple sheriff helicopters?
Yes, there was. Border Patrol sent their ARS at our direction to help out, and we thank them again. This was a great example of coordination of all levels of law enforcement within this area.
Do you know when the last time a Spokane County deputy was struck by gunfire?
It has not been since I've been working. I believe that one of our sergeants in the 80s or 90s was struck by gunfire. That's the last one that I can recall.
You released it that there was a female and a baby also in the original SUV. Were they in danger at all? Or are they?
Whenever you're dealing with these type of situations, everybody involved in the area was in danger. You have citizens on the streets, you have citizens in their homes, the deputies. Whenever you have these type of situations, everybody's at risk. I'll take a couple more questions, folks.
Do you like the other two adults? Are they considered as suspects, or is everyone else in that vehicle?
They're under investigation right now. We'll let you know as soon as we get more information on that.
Did the deputies, were they shot? Were at pretty close range as they were approaching the car, when they were in their car?
They were getting ready to approach the vehicle when
they gotten out of the car.
They were outside their vehicles. Yes.
Sheriff, do you believe Wallace's actions suggest that this was suicide by cop?
I wouldn't speculate on that. His actions appeared to be he was trying to get out of there, trying to get away, and he shot it. He didn't want to go back to prison. That was very clear. He was facing a very long sentence. Last question? No final question?
I would love for you to, as best you can, preliminarily, based on what you've heard from your deputies, the dynamics of the shooting. They pull them over, you're not supposed to get out of the car, but they're behind them, car here, and they're out of the car to approach the driver's side, and suddenly just the passenger door bolts open.
You know, Jeff, until we get a chance to actually interview the eyewitnesses, which would be the surviving deputies, I wouldn't want to speculate on that. So you're just going to have to wait until we get a chance to talk to the deputies. Preliminary investigation is they made contact. He got out of the vehicle and started opening fire on them.
Talk about what you